Hi, my name is Maria Collins, and today we will be making savory monkey bread, which is a pull-apart bread, good for holiday buffets, that sort of thing, or whatever. We'll start with our liquids. This is a combination of milk and water. The milk makes it a more tender dough. And to that, I'm going to add some honey. The honey makes it a little bit sweet and also gives the yeast something to eat. The yeast eats the flour too, but the honey makes it heavy. Throw some oats in here. These are rolled oats. Just give it a little more diversity. Get those a little damp. And then we'll add the flours. This is a combination of whole wheat bread flour and white whole wheat. You can just use all-purpose flour. It'll be fine. And on top of that, I had instant yeast, or rapid rise yeast. It's different than active yeast. It's dried and it's not coated in anything, so it instantly activates. And I'm just going to stir this together, and it'll be kind of shaggy. That's okay. And then once it gets a little bit, not big pools, I'll use my fingers because it works better that way for me. And this is just the first, we're just getting the dough wet right now, the flour wet right now, and that activates the gluten, which kind of holds it all together. And that's it. It's just kind of a shaggy little ball, not anything pretty. And then we'll cover that in plastic wrap, let it sit a little while, and then we'll add the salt and our savory ingredients for our savory bread and knead it all up. Okay, so this has sat for about 20 minutes, and it's gotten a little poofy from the yeast. That's not a big deal, because it'll rise again. And we will just put this on the KitchenAid with our salt. You don't want to add the salt ahead of time because it kind of inhibits a little of the gluten formation, and so this will give it some strength so it gets going. I'm going to start this on low just to get it going. This is going to knead for about 7 minutes. If it looks a little dry, which this does, I'm going to add a little bit of water. It's kind of a visual thing. You want it to clump together. If it looks like it's tearing, just add a little water, a tablespoon at a time. Then I'm actually going to bump it up once that water gets incorporated. Okay, now I'm going to add the eggs and the butter. This makes it a nice tender dough. All right, after this has been kneading for about 7 minutes, we'll add our chopped herbs. This is a combination of parsley for the bright green color and rosemary with a little tarragon. You can kind of change your herbs depending on what you're doing. So you could do just dried herbs de Provence. You could do oregano and basil for kind of a Italian sort of thing. It just kind of depends on what you're going for. And this will just go on low for another minute, kind of incorporate. Okay. Now it's not all evenly distributed, and that's perfectly fine. I'm just going to pull it off of our dough hook here and throw it onto our pastry cloth here. You can also just use it on a floured countertop. I want to stretch it out, and see I flipped it so that the herb part that was all at the bottom is just kind of across the middle. We're going to roll it all up so it won't really matter where the herbs are. They'll get distributed. Now once this is in kind of a rough rectangle here, I'm going to add my onions. And this is just a regular yellow onion, and what I've done is I've microwaved it for 2 minutes. You could also saute it just until it's translucent. There's an enzyme in raw onions and garlic and other alliums, and that interferes with the yeast. It'll keep the yeast from growing. So if you just cook it a little bit first, you won't have problems. And I'm just kind of roughly dividing it, smearing it across. Again, it'll all get distributed in the end. Some fall out, just kind of tuck them back in there. And then from your long side, you want to roll it up into a log. Just like that. And kind of flatten it out along the seam. So this is our seam here. And then we'll roll it this way. All right, so we're going to put this in our bowl here and cover it with plastic wrap. let it sit for 2 to 2.5 hours, kind of depending on how warm your kitchen is. It's going to double in size, so this little ball is going to pretty much fill this bowl. Okay, so it's been, this was actually only about 2 hours. It takes 2.5, sort of depends on how warm your kitchen is. It's nice and cozy in here right now. It got nice and puffy, filled the bowl from our little ball to something nice and big, and then we just dump it out, and then all that air goes from something big to kind of a little mush, and that's okay. So let's throw that there. And then just kind of push it out into like a rough rectangle, 12-ish by 9-ish. It doesn't really matter. You're just kind of making, you're going to cut these out into a grid of 64. So having it sort of in a something with 4 corners makes it easier. And for this, I'm using a pizza wheel. You could also use a pastry blade, but I think this little guy works really well. And then we'll just cut in halves, or quarters, I guess. And then each quarter gets cut into quarters. And then each of those gets cut. So what you're actually doing is making an 8 by 8 grid. And some of these squares are going to be bigger than others, and that's perfectly okay because monkey bread's not exactly a fancy dish. And then what I'll do, so this is my tube pan. It's also known as an angel food cake pan. It's been sprayed with cooking spray. The cheese tends to stick a little bit, so the cooking spray helps with that. I'm going to use these first 3 rows to fill the bottom of the pan, and then the next 2 to kind of do the middle, and then these last 3 to do the top. And between each of these layers, I'll sprinkle cheese. So what I do with each little rectangle square thing is I put it in my hand, the floured side down. That's another thing. If you kind of might need if you're not using a pastry cloth, put a little flour down, and then you kind of push it, curl it over on itself, and pinch it together into a little ball. Roll it roughly. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It'll be fine. And then I'm going to throw it in my pan here. And in that pan is olive oil and parsley and a little bit of the herbs I was using. The parsley doesn't give, I mean, parsley has flavor. People say parsley doesn't have flavor. It has flavor, but it doesn't have a really strong flavor. And the greatest thing about using parsley, especially in a dish like this, is that it has a bright green flavor that doesn't go away when you're baking. So by the end of its time in the oven, it'll still be nice and bright green and look delicious. So I'm just going to continue doing this, and then we'll fill up the pan. Okay, so this is the first round, and we've got it in our oil mixture. Just kind of sprinkle that around and then drop them in. They don't have to be evenly coated. You just want a little bit of green. And this is going to make like 2 concentric circles around the tube. So we're sprinkling a little Gruyere cheese around the top. It's a nice melty cheese. It has a nice savory flavor. And I'm just going to continue doing this for 2 more rounds. So this is the very end. Just put those guys in there. Sprinkle the last of our cheese over the top. So we're going to cover this with plastic wrap again and let it rise probably 35 minutes to an hour, depending on how warm your kitchen is. If it didn't take long the first time around, it won't take long the second time. It's going to come up to almost the top of the pan. Okay, so it has risen for about 35 minutes, and this is what it looks like. It's nice and poofy, and it's almost completely full. So we're going to pop it into a 350-degree oven for about 45 to 55 minutes. Once it's done, it'll be kind of a nice golden brown, and the cheese will be all melty all over, and we'll pick up again there. So here is our savory monkey bread out of the oven. Very nice and gooey, golden brown on top. Just going to kind of go around the edge with a knife because the cheese sometimes sticks a little bit. And this is really great. You can serve it like as an appetizer with marinara or romesco sauce. You can put it on a buffet table. It's too hot. I'm just going to flip it over. And this pan's actually neat because it's a 2-piece mold. See, it sticks a little bit, but not too much. It's a little hot. And there it is. You can serve it hot. You can serve it room temperature. You just pull it apart and enjoy.